guys, welcome back to the Black and White Podcast. I'm Joe Klemczewski, and want to continue moving into some new territory. If you're familiar with the podcast so far, you've seen me really dive into some of the racial tensions happening. But the entire intent of this podcast project has been about looking at the dangers of binary thinking, the way that we often catch ourselves looking for the right and the wrong, the left and the right, the up and the down, all of the ways that we like to categorize each other and ourselves. And my real goal is to be pretty diverse. It just happened that with the racial tensions in the summer of 2020, that was the first thing to discuss. So it I think was pretty serendipitous in a profound way. But I have with me today a super guest, Zac Parsons, who has spent his life in many ways. I think almost all of your career choices, Zac, have been very much aligned with what I'm describing. You're somebody who started out working with youth. You worked in nonprofits. You were in a church community where you wanted to see people grow as individuals and communities and be together. Then you ended up pursuing a master's degree in organizational psychology. And I'd like for you to clean this up for me, but I would almost presume that the work you were in, I can just see your brain working and you're thinking, okay, organizational psychology, this is going to help people be more effective. It's going to help people work better together to create unity, more efficiency, more productivity, more contentment in whatever organization we're speaking of. And I love your overall vibe. Like I got to know you because I saw you moving through our community as this bridge building kind of guy. Every time I see you, you're in a place where there are I don't know, I wouldn't say controversial issues, but there's action, there's heat in a community level, and
Sure.
you're the guy there bringing people together. So I want to hear from your perspective if I'm close to how you feel, kind of life mission orientation.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that intro and articulation of what the Dr. Joe, viewpoint is for whatever it is that I've been trying to jump into over these years. It is an interesting time to be a bridge builder, maybe a rough time to be a bridge builder. Or maybe this is, the opportunity and the exact time that we look for something like that. But if you do identify as a bridge builder, then you have to be playing in those spaces where there are divides, whether they've always been there or whether they just came there. That is the space where the bridges get built. It's funny, we didn't talk about you were going to use bridge building as a metaphor, but I've got this creek behind me. You said make sure that you pick a background that sort of fits whatever my brand is, and this is what came to mind. And there is no bridge behind me, but maybe one needs to be built, or like Oregon Trail style, we could attempt to ford the river and see how that goes. So yeah, I think you nailed a lot of what I am about, or I tend to be about, and where I've made sort of changes and adjustments in my professional and life journey. It has been in times where whatever organization I'm with or side that I'm on seems to be skewing too far to a side, and sort of wanting to be able to redirect in some way something back to the middle, back to the whole, back to unity. And even the word organization, like when you say the word organization, I visualize like organs inside of a body and how kind of useless they are without each other. And you can go back to the Christian, biblical metaphor about the parts of the body, arguing over which one is more important. But that's really how I try and see every aspect of life, whether it's through organizational psychology or family dynamics, or in this case, lately, a lot of community dynamics. And honestly, right now, I'm kind of heartbroken.
Yeah, I mean, it's that time and culture. We're going to always look back at this phase, and as I've worked through some conversations with Black friends all around the country from different backgrounds, it's been phenomenal to hear some of these common themes where they say, you know, well, first of all, yeah, thanks for noticing. We've been going through this our entire lives. And now that there's something this visceral and this visual, you know, seeing a man methodically, slowly executed, and now other stories coming, oh, well, this happened 3 months ago and this happened 10 months ago. And all of these things have been there. You guys just didn't pay attention. I'm seeing more people feel what you just articulated, that heartbroken, like, how could we let this happen? How could it be 2020 and we're in no better shape than we are now as a society? And that's why I wanted to have you on, Zac. I seriously, I thought of you as just a perfect segue into expanding these conversations. And I see you as somebody who really gets the social side. There are some economic divides that I would like to touch on that get
Sure.
into this. Patrick Preston, my last guest, said, you know, that used to be the conversation. We used to talk about classism and the socioeconomic divides that were putting pressure between groups of people, different strata in our communities. And now all of a sudden it's back to just plain old skin color, because we've just kind of devolved into seeing the police brutality. But when you look at our own community, when you look at Evansville, Indiana, I don't know if a lot of people understand some of the stats, because ever since I've moved here, which is now, gosh, going on 27, 28 years ago,
Wow.
the community mantra has always been, quote, it's a great place to raise a family.
Yeah.
But when you look at some of the crime rates, just the poverty, the education levels, it's probably one of the worst places to raise a family if you look at it statistically. And so what that tells me, Zac, is maybe in a lot of our world, you know, yours, mine, maybe it is a great place, but there's a dividing line where on that side of the street, that side of town, it's a pretty freaking horrible place to raise a family. So I'd like to hear your just kind of history of our own community and what you've been doing to try and build those bridges and change the whole place to make it a better place for everybody.
Huh. Yeah. Well, and I think you're right about that. Somehow it's both true that it is a great place to raise a family, and you've got however many hundreds or thousands of families who would say just that. And then you have very real statistics that show how challenging it is to still grow up, get a great education, get a job, start a family, buy a house, et cetera, American dream. So my entree in Evansville was about 21 years ago, and then came back full time here a little over 10 years ago. And once I knew that this was going to be my home, I hated it. I didn't want to live here. And I was here to raise my family, and I didn't feel like I was a part of what was going on. There's a lot of great family ties in this community, and especially ties to the high school that you went to. And that's often, you know, one of the first or second questions that people ask as they're meeting somebody new. And I didn't have a good answer for that because I grew up in Phoenix, and that is the far, far, far west side, if you will. But after a couple of years of being kind of miserable and saying, yeah, Evansville sucks, and then especially once the data came out, we had that Gallup poll, I think this was back in 2013 or so, 2012, that ranked Evansville as one of the top 10 most miserable communities in the entire country. And this wasn't some sort of objective measure of misery. This was polling people who lived here, polling people who lived all over the country and asking them these different metrics. And so subjectively, we self-identified as a miserable community. And when that came out, and I realized that it wasn't some sort of external force that was pushing my misery on me and our misery on us, and that had a lot more to do with my perspective and the mindset that I took on, it was almost overnight. It was almost like a snap of a finger. I can do something about this. If Evansville sucks, it's because I suck. And if Evansville has a potential to be a better place, it's because I am willing to do whatever it takes to do that. And so it's finding other like-minded people coming together, organizing, and moving things forward. So some of those initiatives were more formal, with the whole TEDx Evansville formation, which we did in 2014, 2015. And some of those things are more informal, just how you enter every room and how you look for those people who are ready to engage and find something positive to build together, even if it's just building a conversation for a few moments. And what is breaking my heart right now is some version of, and it's mostly on social media because we've been quarantined and a lot of our conversations and relationships have been sort of set over there, but it's some version of, hey, if you identify with blank, go ahead and unfriend me. Hey, if you're not pissed off about blank, go ahead and delete me. Or bragging about the number of people that they've culled from their list, and that now there's some sort of badge of honor by excluding people who are different in a way that feels righteous. Whereas the whole idea of inclusion, the whole idea of the spirit behind something like Black Lives Matter is all lives matter, but Black lives matter. They need to be brought up into an area of inclusion and equality in how they're treated by police in this regard, or treated by other, public organizations as well. And so the very idea of trying to exclude others who might disagree with that on all sides of this issue honestly just breaks my heart, because that is not the unifying, organizing thing that animates me and gives me life. And I haven't figured out how to express that. So you're doing like a little therapy session for me here right now, because I haven't really known how to articulate this and might still not be doing a great job with it. But these are the things that have been on my heart and on my mind a lot lately in our community.
Well, you just zeroed in right on the bullseye of what I expected our conversation to revolve around today, and that is how do you create that inclusivity in those conversations? And I think I will clarify this a little bit for you. If you have not seen the Serena Williams post from a couple days ago,
I have not. Yeah, enlighten me.
Serena Williams, the great tennis player, had a pretty long tweet, and she said, I'm sick of COVID-19. I'm sick of Black Lives Matter. I'm sick of this. I'm sick of Trump. I'm sick of Biden. And she created all these dichotomies, both sides of every issue. And very much like you said, she said, I'm sick of Christians. I'm sick of atheists. I'm sick of how every single dichotomy is constantly just at war with each other. She said, where are the days when you could disagree and yet not feel like you have to shove that down somebody's throat, not feel like you had to completely isolate yourself away from every other single thought or belief? Like, are we going to ever be able to get back to the place where, the America of a melting pot metaphor is still here? Like, we have shared values that unify us, and all of those other things just fade away. That's who we are personally, but in our collective social selves, it just doesn't matter. And I mean, this is it was well said, and there was a lot of emotion behind her words, and that to me is a place where I know you strive to live, and I have had to work very hard to strive to live, because my temperament was to be that black and white person, that everything was a binary, everything was as a yes or a no, or right or a wrong. And it was a painful 10 or 15 years for me to rip myself out of that identity and really live a life of authentic unity, trying to understand those shared values and celebrate the differences between people instead of isolate away from them.
Yeah. Well, and I understand. I can recognize the irony in my being upset and even collecting people who have done a certain behavior as almost like a them, and the irony is not lost on me. So that's another reason why I haven't been able to figure out how to articulate it the right way. But what I don't want to do is exclude those people from a relationship with me, even if our relationship is just me reading or experiencing what they're putting out there, and it's not necessarily a two-way relationship. I mean, I'm receiving it and not engaging back, but I want to know what they're thinking. I want to know what they're feeling. I don't want that excluded from my life. And trying to figure out, where is that line? Do I want to be friends with a murderer? Probably not. But is it just murder where you draw the line of how you exclude somebody from a relationship with you? How important is our identity as Americans? Is that even not the biggest tent that we should gather under? You know, if this was Independence Day, the movie, and, you know, the aliens are coming, would our tent then expand to all of humanity? Or is that too small and it needs to include, you know, everything that lives in our biodome? I don't know where to draw that line.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I have a lot of conversations with a lot of people, and so many of my friends will say, man, you're the only guy I can talk to about these things. Like the level that you think and like to converse, I don't have anybody else in my life to do this with. And you're one of those people for me, Zach. You go to that next level and challenge me because of how willing you are to flay yourself open and say, yeah, I could be wrong here. Even in my attempt to be right, I could be putting myself in just the next layer of wrongness. And I agree, it's a really tough place to go. But you know, the interesting thing to me is that these conversations and these battles are not new to us. If you go back and you read things from, you know, the Bolshevik Revolution, the French Revolution, as people were trying to figure out societies, back to Plato and Socrates, trying to figure out the first republic and democracy, like these are the same conversations we've always had, and yet we can't figure it out. And I want to say the answer's right in front of us, and I hope we can see it someday. But it was almost best, I think, stated by Harry Truman. When there was this conflict about, are you a Christian or are you not a Christian? We can't elect a Christian or a non-Christian president. So yeah, again, the same conversations we have today, right?
Yeah.
He said, guess what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to care about my faith publicly because I don't govern that way. I will be the president of all people. And I feel like you and I, Zach, have this goal of wanting to be a friend to all people, wanting to be a civic leader of all people, wanting to be a community involvement, motivated person with all people. And those personal tangents should just, that's who we are. That's okay. That's in the background. But why does everything have to define every single thing we do and have to be suspect as every incentive or every motive?
Well, you and I have had you brought up, the religious, component and atheist and Christian and how, religion, colors and sometimes animates our lives and sometimes blinds us to other things once we've sort of latched on to that. But one of the reasons that religions can be so powerful is because they provide a level of certainty in a very uncertain, complicated, complex life. And I cannot think of a more uncertain time in society, as I've been alive since 1980, as the last quarter or so, not knowing how dangerous, deadly, everything about this disease has been a cluster. I mean, it's been so frustrating and confusing, and not knowing how to respond to it personally, as a business owner, as a citizen, who to trust, who not to trust. All of that uncertainty, I think, has created in a lot of us a desire to grab onto anything that feels certain, even if it's the wrong thing, because the comfort of certainty is stronger and more alluring than the discomfort of uncertainty. And so if we all know that racism is bad, and we can look across a social media screen at someone else's behavior and pin that racist pin to them and paint them with that scarlet letter, that actually feels good and feels like the right thing to do, because we're certain that is bad. That's like being a murderer, right? That's beyond the pale. You cannot be a racist and be my friend. So we pin that on people, and we create a sense of duty to seek those people out and exclude them. And it could also be, your political affiliation. If you voted for X, you voted for Y. Now I know where you stand, and guess what? We're not going to have a relationship anymore. And maybe the more painful part is when you see it with families. And when you talk about somebody at the end of their life, what matters most to them? What are the things that they wish they would have spent more time on, spent less time on? Everybody, all the research, all the anecdotes, everything says, I wish I would have spent more time on relationships, the people that are most important to me. Not everybody gets to have a great relationship with their family, but to the extent that we can, why are we looking for ways to exclude our family over issues like this?
Yeah, and you're right. That was one of the most painful points in my life, was looking at the very, very real possibility of losing my entire family over something like this. And the only thing that kept us all together was the knowledge that the thoughts and the feelings we're having right now, that are very heated and intense because of these heuristics that we built up in our brains, may change. And a year from now, 5 years from now, on our deathbeds, do we want to look back and said, man, we could have made it through that so easily? Like, why did we break up our entire family over that? And if you put us in the bullseye with that last comment, this one is in the center of the bullseye. Because it is what you said. I mean, this is exactly, if we get through racism, if we get through these intense political divides, we as human beings are still going to label and categorize each other in some way for that evolutionary need of instantaneous safety. You totally nailed it, Zac. And when you can say, oh, you believe the same thing I do, religiously, politically, even just based on the amount of melanin in our skin, that automatically identifies you as an us. And now I can feel better. Again, Patrick Preston said every time he goes into a restaurant, he said every single time there's always somebody there that you see them kind of moving their wallet toward themselves, or they clutch their purse. But he said, if I walk in with a white guy, if I walk in with a Joe Klemzeski, it's like instantaneously, like, everything's cool. Oh, he's got one of us with him, so he must already be vetted. That instant heuristic of familiarity is there. And so it is hard work. This is one of the single most foundational principles of social science, is that contact is how you break down prejudice. Contact is how you break down division. So if I'm afraid of another race, or I'm afraid, like you said, politically, you go on social media, you see one person characterizing an entire party as evil. They're trying to destroy America. These people are so stupid, they don't get it. And we instantly have that canopy of labeling that's instant. And the only way we break it down is to start having these conversations, to start saying, wait a second, I just got to know a Republican. I just got to know a Democrat. I understand the shared values. We may have different ideals, that color that. We may have different thoughts of the way we think it should be executed in society. But let's talk about those differences. Let's not just push each other into the far corners of the ring to fight. And so my question to you is, because you are such a bridge building person who you just automatically diffuse any situation. When you walk into a room, Zac, you constantly just bring people together. So tell our audience why you do that, and the outcome. Do you see long-term change in people simply because you have helped curate an environment for them in a way that brings those defenses down?
Let me chew on that and make sure that lands right. So the question is, why try to be a connector? Why reduce that tension? And have I seen changes in people from a result of modeling that, basically?
Yeah, you are somebody that has an intentionality about you to do that. You walk into a place and you automatically are thinking peace, civility, unity, connection. That's almost a given when you walk into a room. And so I know you live that. That's just part of the fabric of your nature. And I would like to hear if there are ways you've seen that really dismantle those defenses and bring people together and bring about real lasting change.
Well, I think it starts with realizing that you're an idiot, like realizing your own ignorance, and like literally like the things that you don't know. Like I walk in a room and realize like I do not know enough about this situation to have any sort of definite beliefs about how that person believes or is behaving a certain way towards me. Maybe they had a bad day and that's why they won't make eye contact with me. Maybe my fly is down and it's an awkward situation and they don't want to make eye contact with me. There could be all sorts of things, but that even starts with yourself. Realize that you're an idiot about yourself, your own motives, your own understanding of the world it can be a mystery to you. And so how do you solve a situation where you don't know enough information? You seek it out. And if you want to learn about somebody, you have to talk to them. And if you want to talk to them and you want to learn from them, you have to be willing to let whatever they say come in and land and disrupt whatever sort of preconceived idea you had of their beliefs or their identity or your ability to connect over things as well. So I feel like I have seen that a little bit when I've seen people come into a situation with humility, recognizing their ignorance. And I think that's step one. And then the other is maybe creating some sort of safety around that, whether it's the person who makes the first move, makes the first word, that acknowledges, hey, I don't know enough about you. I'm ignorant here. Help me to understand who you are, what you think, what you believe. Let me learn more about you. A lot of times if you're already engaged in a relationship with somebody and you want to enter something like a debate, this is something that I've seen that is very powerful and has stuck with me. And this is, I believe it was Brett Weinstein and Jordan Peterson and all those guys, when they would start a debate, they would insist on steel manning the other person's argument. So the opposite of kind of a straw man, to where you can easily tear somebody down because you've constructed everything about their position in such a way to tear it down. But if you have to articulate to somebody what you believe they believe in such a way that they would nod to that and agree, yeah, you got it. That's what I believe. That's how I would put it myself. Only until then can you actually have a conversation and meet somewhere in the middle. And if we insist on engaging with somebody based on what we think they believe without first having that chance to clarify it, we're just going to be misfiring and talking around and over and through each other to the extent to where who we think we are excluding at the end of that isn't even what this person believes or who they are. We are engaging with a caricature of somebody that is not the actual person and what they believe and who they are on the other end.
You know, every time I conduct an interview like this, there's always one moment that I realize, okay, that is the thing. You know, if I have to create a title or a blurb or create that theme premise, like that's it. And you just did it right here. Those steps of humility, I'm gonna articulate it into two steps as you mentioned.
Yeah, steel man what I just said. Make sure that I can nod along with what I think I said.
Well, I mean, you just nailed it. Like the humility that I may be wrong, and even if I have these bedrock beliefs about something, someone, some concept, what if I am dead wrong? Because I think we can all identify places in our life where that's happened. You can say, man, I would have died on this hill 20 years ago, and wow, I totally believe the opposite now. So number one, going in with that kind of humility, because that is the total opposite of going in with strong label tendency and dividing and creating that bifurcation of us versus them. but then to say, what I'm here to learn. I'm going to come into it open-minded. I want to listen to these people. And the last thing, which is the steelman concept, is to give them the benefit of the doubt. Don't assume the worst. Either assume neutrality or assume the best.
Right.
And it makes me think of this issue we're going through right now with policing. After the George Floyd murder, it came about that this thing 10 months ago happened with Elijah McClain, a 23 or 24-year-old, 140-pound massage therapist, a young boy who just at night went to grab an iced tea at a convenience store, very much like Trayvon Martin. He's walking back home, but he's in Colorado and he has a ski mask on. So somebody calls the cops. There's a black guy with a ski mask. 12 minutes on the ground and he's dead. And as he's completely compliant, handcuffed, 2 cops on him to the point where he's vomiting because of the weight of their bodies, just like George Floyd calling out for his deceased mother. Elijah was doing everything he could to beg for his life. He said, look, I don't have a weapon. I'm a vegetarian. I don't even kill flies. He's throwing out anything he can just to prove to these guys that he's not a threat. Then they inject him with a sedative dose meant for a man 300 pounds, and he's dead because those cops assumed the worst.
Yeah.
They could not assume this may just be a guy going out for an iced tea. It had to be some kind of criminal deviancy deserving of the worst possible imagery and resulting in death. And I mean, that's a stark example, but I wanted to throw that in there to show how we psychologically do that to other people when we can walk into a room or into a social media conversation and instantly lash out, assuming the worst in this person, instead of settling back into a place of humility, neutrality, open-mindedness, and even giving them the benefit of, hey, we may have a shared value. And I got to say, Zac, in wrapping up this thought, that is truly my goal in every kind of hot button topic that I may post in social media. I know if I throw a grenade into the middle of the room, I'm going to get people coming in from all angles. And my goal is to bring people back to the center, and people who normally wouldn't agree, I want to coordinate and facilitate this conversation in a way that they see the shared values that we have. And I think the way you just gave those 3 points is a perfect step-by-step that people can grasp and listen and learn and then maybe apply.
I mean, you have to have people who you look up to that have given examples of that to remind you in those moments when it does feel hard and it feels too hard. And again, this background ends up being perfect. Like this is like the stomping grounds of Abraham Lincoln. Like this is the forest area, type of forest area where he sort of grew up, and he paddled out on that canoe and took it down to New Orleans and saw a African family get sold into slavery when he was a teenager, and it transformed him and it changed his life, and it allowed him to remember that at the hardest times of the Civil War. And even though he was adamantly opposed to so much of what was happening with the Confederacy, it wasn't a matter of punishing those brothers and sisters once the war was over, but bringing them back in and understanding that there was a union to be restored and a union to be maintained. And when I think of, I mean, in that case, we're talking about war, but it's still death. I mean, that is like murder. Like he was looking at people who had killed others maybe that he was close to, many thousands of people within the Union, and said, you know what, that is not a bridge too far. That is not beyond the pale. Come back in. We are still in us. We will figure this out, and we will find that common unity again together. So he's the example that I think of all the time when there's someone who is across some line that I feel is impossible to bridge, and think, no, he did it. He did it so many times in the most amazing circumstances. I can step up here and have a conversation and maintain a relationship.
Man, that is well said. You know, the last thing that I had thought about to bring up and discuss with you is the fact that not only are we building those bridges between seemingly, irreconcilable people and abstract concepts, but what if we didn't have quite as many bridges? What if society was brought down temperature-wise to a place where people just didn't feel those innate threats? And we started out talking about our local community, Evansville, Indiana. And not only was it number one in the country rated as the most miserable place, there was a subsequent study that was the least happiest. At one point, it was the least healthiest, the most overweight. We've been studied to have, 200 to 300% the violent crime and sexual assault. And I think, burglary and things like that are almost 1,000 times the national average. And we're in the bottom 5% of education. 80% of our college graduates leave. Our population has been in a steady decline for 20 years. We have the worst air and water quality in the country. Like you always could not pick a worse place. And yet you and I both have decided, it doesn't have to be that way. You can make change. And I've seen you. The reason I'm so attracted to you as a community leader, and the reason I'm trying to prompt you to run for mayor, we're going to start your campaign today. This is going to be the start of your campaign.
Sure.
Is that you do have that attitude that things can change. And when there's just one person who can force that attitude, it does happen. And I was speaking to a political science professor just a couple weeks ago, and I said, look, when you look at this, when you look at 2020 America, do you think we have gone too far? Do you think there can be massive systemic change enough that really puts us back on the right track, or are we just too far into this division? And, she brought me back to massive revolutions in history, things that were brought about by people like Karl Marx. And, and those were all very much based on social equality. When you look at the opposite of Evansville, Indiana, where is the happiest place on the planet? Who year after year is voted as the happiest people? Do you know?
There's I know Denmark is one, but then there's also is it Bhutan?
Well, it's always the Nordic states, and so Norway, Denmark, etc. And they've made societal decisions where instead of us, who we incarcerate 2.2 million people, and which is, everybody, every other industrialized nation combined doesn't even equal what we do. And we'll pay $80,000 a year to imprison somebody for life. Those countries pay $8,000 a year for 4 years for college. So we have a country full of criminals that increases generational poverty and suffering and the welfare state. They have a country full of doctors and teachers and scientists because they educate them. They spend their money differently. They've made that decision. We put all of our money into the top, where for the last 40 years, if you're in the top 10% of society economically, you now have doubled your wealth. If you're in the top 1%, you've quadrupled it. If you're in the top 100th of 1%, you've increased it by 700%. But the bottom 50% are making less. And so we decide that we'll pour all of our resources into the top and hope something can trickle down. And 40 years of that experiment has failed. But you go over to the Nordic states, and you can be a teacher, you can be a sanitation worker, you can be a taxi driver, and you can make a minimum wage or a living wage. You can go home to your family, work 8 hours a day, still be able to go camping on the weekend, go to the park with your family. That just doesn't happen in the US anymore. We have decided it's going to be a winner-take-all culture. And so there is so much economic tension splitting us apart, where everybody is fighting over resources. Everybody's working 60 to 80 hours a week. Moms and dads are working second and third jobs. The rest of the world doesn't live like this. Germany, who was one of the great success stories of the COVID pandemic, they just said, okay, we're going to listen to our scientists. Their prime minister happens to have a PhD in chemistry, so she's cool with scientists making the decisions about science.
Yeah.
And so they automatically said, okay, time out, everybody stay home. Instantly, the government pays everybody's paychecks for 2 months, and now they're back open. They didn't have a quarter of the economic or health disaster we did, because they said, as a unit, as a society, we're going to make sure everybody moves together, everybody's taken care of. And these are the things we just decided as a country we don't want, because that takes away my freedom. If I have to pay a penny more in taxes, or I have to allow somebody else to get something, an assistance where they need help, that's not right. I worked for mine. So I wanted to just bring that up as a little backdrop, Zac, and talk about the economic forces that create division. We've kind of touched on religion. We've touched about, politics a little bit. But in your experience as somebody who's constantly in the community, you've built Habitat for Humanity homes. You've worked in some of the lowest economic sectors of our community, trying to bring restoration and opportunity. Where do you stand as somebody with a background in organizational psychology and who has done a lot of nonprofit work to say, look, this is how we need to act as a country?
Well, there's a lot there. Honestly, my mind has changed on this over the years. When probably about 5 years ago, we were looking at first opening our business. I remember exactly where I was driving in San Francisco, of all places, up one of those giant hills with my fiance, future business, partner, discussing if we should have a goal of a $15 an hour wage, minimum wage for our employees. And she looked at me like, you're crazy. We can't afford it. Then she's the accountant, right? She knows how all of the, dollars and costs and everything would add up. And I'm, the dreamer, the idealist, but let's shoot for that. Now, after having done it for a while and knowing how difficult that is to set a goal for something like a high minimum wage in the type of business that we're in, and after having experienced something as relatively unprecedented as the shutdown of public places and public coffee shops, which is the business that we have together, it's hard to know if something like a mandatory minimum wage is the answer. Something that is top down that way, saying this is how high the floor needs to be to make sure that everyone lives the right way. I'm a little more libertarian now in the sense of encouraging businesses, finding the right incentives for businesses in the community to respond to those needs as businesses and less government mandate. But again, maybe this blows up my campaign for mayor that you just launched for me, but I think it's less about what the government does and more about what the community decides and what they decide to do with their money. And that community isn't just individuals and their pocketbooks, but business owners and their pocketbooks and their approach to how they choose to pay their employees, not what's mandated on top of them. But I do think that money does make the world go round in a lot of ways, and it prevents people from flourishing in life in ways that we don't even have to count right here. And that is a huge part of this problem. So many of the issues we've talked about already today can be alleviated or at least explored for solutions with greater funding. We've got a We've got an issue that just blew up in our local city council. I don't know how relevant this is to the rest of your podcast audience, but how government funding goes towards low-income housing, and disagreements about how that funding was spent from the government turned into accusations of racism from people on the same side of the political party. And the discussion was shut down. The opportunity for coming together and growing and figuring out how to do it was shut down. And I don't know how that gets fixed, how quickly that gets fixed. We have to figure out how to talk to each other again.
So by your argument of a libertarian solution,
I might have used the wrong word there. I know libertarian's a loaded term and an entire philosophy, just more libertarian than I was 5 years ago.
I just say you don't want the government to mandate certain things. So
I'd say so, yeah.
So it's okay for our first trillionaire, the wealthiest man on the planet, Jeff Bezos, to make, I believe, almost $1 billion a day, even through the COVID epidemic, while 1/3 of his employees are receiving government assistance. We haven't had a minimum wage raise in 12 years, and at that standard of living set, I believe it was in 1968. If it had stayed on pace, minimum wage today would be above $40 an hour. That's a living wage. But now we're saying, no, we think it's okay to be $7.25. Not even 15. And I'll make this point to you that I think you're right. Even people who understood a more socially inclusive paradigm, back in the 18th and 19th century, they knew you could not do it in a vacuum. You had to do it as an entire society, because if you were paying your employees twice what everybody else was in Evansville, Indiana, in that Evansville economy, it doesn't work. But it has been shown to work when an entire city like Seattle does it. When that's the standard, everybody's standard of living goes up. Everybody raises their prices a little bit. Everybody has to pay a little bit more and make those decisions in a more discretionary way. But at least the bottom people can now make a living, because if you do not mandate those things as a government, if the government is not partaking in a role to take care of those who can't take care of themselves, you will have a caste system. You will have peasants who are just filling the streets with homelessness, and crime goes up. And so again, when you look at the Gini coefficient, the thing that destroys societies is when income equality gets too far apart.
Sure. Yeah.
And so you know that 40 years ago, the average American CEO made 15 times what his employees made. Now it's above 500 times.
Yeah.
So on the same day, the exact same day, Disney lays off 150,000 employees. They gave $15 billion of bonuses to their executives.
Yeah.
That's when government does not take a role in making sure that the hardest working class people can't make a living. If they're not going to create boundaries that are fair, then the resources will always go to the top. And I think you would have encountered some of this research in organizational psychology, but in any closed system, you will always see in almost no time 90% of that resource base goes to the top 10%.
Sure.
The top 10% will find a way in no time to own 90% of the resources, because there's always going to be people who are a little bit smarter, a little bit better at something, a little luckier, a little stronger, a little better looking. Every single social variable that tilts the scale in your favor will always ensure resources follow you more easily, just like skin color today. And so again, if the government does not intervene at the appropriate level, you will always have society just shredding itself down the center. And then studies show that even the wealthiest people are less happy. Our wealthiest people in the US are not as happy as less wealthy people in Europe. Because what good does it do you to drive your Lamborghini down the road through Skid Row, through Tent City, where you're seeing
Sure.
25% unemployment. And so I would disagree with you, Mayor, that that government
It's
can't.
over before it started, Joe.
I've launched your campaign and destroyed it in 30 minutes. But I think these are things people don't think about, again, because it's the American way. The American way is to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and do it yourself and fuck everybody else. You know, if they can't get it done, then they should just by natural selection die, go away, just get away from me because I'm busy working and doing it. And that's the antithesis of what you described about having the humility and the understanding and knowing that these people just may not have the same opportunities that everybody else does.
Well, I'm glad that I let you go on the anti-libertarian tirade there for a little bit, because it helped me to understand your position a little bit better. And I think I would maybe retract or refine some of that sort of libertarian flavor that I put on my position, because I do think that there are things that the government needs to do to intervene at the top. When you get to those multi-billionaires, trillionaires, people who have as much money as countries, that is where the government needs to intervene, and that is not at a too high of cost to that individual. Taking somebody to still owning billions of dollars, or even making a salary cap, if you will, of how much a CEO of an individual organization makes, whatever that X multiplier is from their lowest paid employee, those sorts of things, I'm all game for. It was more the mandatory minimum that threw me off and made me think, yeah, you can't just say we're going to make sure the floor is this high, because that it would have killed our business before it even started if that's where we would have approached things. So call me when there are 7 digits in my bank account, and we'll talk again, see if I still feel this way.
Well, I mean, those are the tools that make a difference, and that's why we have a government that legislates these things and debates them. But unfortunately, so if you go all the way back to 1890, the Wagner Act was our first antitrust legislation. And then we even went into the 1930s where we created more legislation that was just sweeping in terms of workers' rights. I mean, we started out with child labor laws and then women's suffrage. And then we looked at the fact that, I mean, some employers were just treating their workers as if they were indentured servants or slaves and demanding certain things. And if you didn't work 120 hours a week and you weren't willing to risk your life in a molten steel mill, we'll just replace you. And that all of those things, all of that work for 100 years, when we were in post-World War II, even into the 1970s, the level of income equality was the best we had ever achieved. It was the best. And that's why we look at that as the greatest generation in the rebuilding of America. You know, in the 1930s, in the New Deal, we paid people to work. And now in this pandemic, we've paid people to stay home. We're okay writing $600 checks from the federal government on top of state unemployment just to stay home, when FDR wrote those checks to get people building America. In 1980, within 6 months, Ronald Reagan, through executive order, legislated away 40% of all of the workers' rights laws that it took 100 years to build up. And from 1980 down, after 100 years of progress of workers' rights and income equality, now we've gone the other direction, and we are the bottom of the barrel in the entire world. And I only bring up these things, Zach, to say that government does have a role. We can improve it like we did for 100 years, or we can destroy it in an instant. And that is where these tensions come from. That is why everybody's on edge. That is why when you have to work 3 jobs, and yet your employer's making 500 times what you are,
right.
The game is never going to get better. And so we will continue to see division, and I believe ultimately civil war, if we as a society don't do as much work as we're asking ourselves to do individually. We're asking ourselves to be less racist. We're asking ourselves to care more about people. But then the government is just, while we turn a blind eye, shoveling all of the money and the power to the top and nobody else gets anything. Zac, 3 human beings own half of the wealth of the United States.
Yeah. No, it's unacceptable. Or if we continue to accept it, we will see the kind of consequences that you're talking about. It's unsustainable.
Well, let's wrap this up. I told you I wanted to keep this under an hour, but number one, I appreciate the conversation because bringing it back to that center of the bullseye, I know your goal as a human being in almost every situation is unity. And to create that unity, there has to be a felt sense of equality of the value of your ideas, the value of who you are as a person. And that's why I wanted to bring in the economic and the social sides together, because I think those are the 2 greatest things that we as human beings need from each other. We need to feel that we value each other, and we need to feel like we have equality of opportunity. I'm okay having to work hard, but you gotta make it at least a winnable game. You gotta create a playing field that is at least fair.
Let's play, and let's root out those situations to where people are not able to play together, to work together, and let's make it right.
Well, is there anything I have left out that you as a bridge building human being would want to know? Because I want to make our community better. I want to make our world better. And you are the kind of guy that I will stand shoulder to shoulder with, because I know your heart's in the right place. I know you're willing to do it. So what's the one last thing that you would say we have to do together?
Honestly, I would just say weigh the costs of cutting people out of your life who are different than you. Whether it's a disagreement, whether it's skin color, whether it's religion, whether it's politics, there's probably a good reason, even if you don't even know what that reason is, that you were brought together. Maybe it was in the past, maybe it's something potentially in the future, but the cost of severing relationships is really high. And when we die, we're going to look back and wish that those were maintained, reestablished, and healed. So instead of longing for healing and catharsis and reconciliation, let's not create the wounds. Take a beat, take a breath, process it, listen, maintain the relationship.
Well, that's why you're just one of the best people in our community. The owner of Honeymoon Coffee Company, and your work in the community, in nonprofits, your future campaign as mayor. I couldn't be behind you more. I'm just so thankful that you're somebody I can call a friend, and I think this is incredibly worthwhile for a lot of people.
Well, you're a special person in my life as well, and I'm going to continue to call on you for wise counsel. So don't cut me off after this podcast, please.
I won't unfriend you.
Thank you. That's all I can ask for.
Zac Parsons, thank you so much. And you guys watching, listening, thanks again. And we'll see you next time in another episode of the Black and White Podcast.